Welcome back, and we have our historian, geopolitical analyst, Tim Alexander, at the bottom of the hour, Chris Harris. We've been working diligently this morning, talking over the last few days, preparing for our nuclear report. Tim, lots of news going on. The worst is the abomination system, as George Will says.
I have something even worse than that. I'm just hitting the publish button on my blog here.
By the way, I say that facetiously. It's like a juggler trying to juggle flying knives in the air. Which knife is going to take your head off? And it's
or
not
your hand.
Or your hand, yeah. So yeah. You're quite right. I mean, who am I to say what's the worst thing? There's so many worse things going on. It's almost a joke, isn't it?
Yeah, last month we almost had the Third World War. Israel and the global banking cartel, they wanted us to strike Syria. And Russia and China made it pretty clear that they weren't going to sit back and let that happen. And the British House of Commons, in a rather surprise vote, said no. And enough people in the U.S. Congress said no without a vote, that it was clear that we couldn't do that. Well, so within the last few hours, the Israeli Air Force has twice struck in Syria in major attacks on Syrian military bases. The one base that's hit was the base that they nuked, I think, back in May. And when I say nuke, they used tactical nuclear weapons,
I have to agree with you, Tim. You top me. I mean, Obamacare is bad, but this is Armageddon we're talking about now.
And do not trust Bibi Netanyahu. He is a monster. The man is determined to inflame the entire Middle East, and I believe, and a lot of very serious former retired senior intelligence people, both in Mossad and his military intelligence, believe that Netanyahu will manage to get them all killed. And this was unprovoked. It was clearly an act of war under international law, and it's his Halloween gift to us all. I mean, the devil loves, I guess, Halloween. And
no. Remember now what Halloween is now. Remember, there's Druidic celebration days, and there's 7 high or low holy days where they actually do human sacrifice. Halloween is the Irish Celtic New Year, the first of the New Year, and this Hallows Eve got absorbed into the Catholic Church because they wanted to absorb all the pagans. So they took the Hallows Eve and they made it All Saints Day, which is November 1st, the next day.
Right, exactly.
The issue here is that the Israelis did this because the Israeli symbol, which is this Sinzigi, the 6-pointed star, is not the Star of David. It's called the Star of Astarte, which is a spring human sacrifice symbol of the highest goddess for human sacrifice.
Well, if you look in the Jewish Encyclopedia under Star of David, you will find that it says very clearly that this was not a historical symbol of the Jewish people. King David probably never had any knowledge of it. It was an occult symbol that was adopted by the Zionist movement in the late 1800s.
Right. And then what the Zionists, by the way, are not Jews. The word Jew means praiser in Hebrew. These are Sabbatean Nazis, and that's why I was just looking at the news reports today about a Nazi who was buried in a cemetery in Israel.
Yeah.
People don't understand it was the collaboration between, there was 144,000 that were full-bore 100% atheistic Sabbatean Satanists that were in part of the German SS. People don't know that the State of Israel was a collaboration where they wanted to make sure the rabbis were killed first, and anybody who was a religious Jew died, and only the Sabbateans would be exported to the new State of Israel. This is why it was co-founded with Russia as a communist atheistic state. And
Adolf Hitler's grandfather was a Rothschild in Vienna. Right. He was one of the senior Rothschilds.
Yeah, so you got to understand the reason why the Balfour Balfour Declaration and why this was done by the British is the British and the banksters that were behind them, because remember, all the wars since Napoleonic Wars are all banker wars. And if Israel's doing this, they're just itching to start World War III in the Middle East. They're itching to collapse the world economy, and they're just, the Israelis, or if you want to call it, I said this before, and it's pretty gross, but it's true. If America is Uncle Sam, then the anatomical part, which is called the thallus, is the state of Israel. Okay?
Well, that may have a religious significance, because the Ashkenazis who converted to dogmatic Judaism 700 years after the birth of Christ were phallic worshippers, and their king, he was leasing his army to the Holy Roman Emperor in Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Emperor, and he needed more troops, and he saw that there was too much homosexuality, and he wanted to change religions. Well, he didn't want to become Christian, because that would put him under the thumb of the people he was leasing his army to. He couldn't become Islamic, because those were the people he was fighting. He sent delegations to various places, and he brought back from Damascus some of the Jews who never went back to Israel after the Babylonian captivity, and they were into Talmudic Judaism, which was it was a lot of Satanism involved and everything else. The Jews of the Bible would never have recognized the religion that was brought back. Anyway, look,
exactly.
There are a lot of good. The world is. There are millions of Jews, and millions of them are very good people.
Well, there's a lot of good people that are even
Netanyahu
Muslims.
is a nut.
Okay,
he's a nut.
Let me explain. There's a lot of people that are lukewarm in whatever religion, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, because they haven't got deep into the roots of it. But the highest levels of all of these religions are malevolently evil, including the current Pope Francis, who, by the way, they say, is the Pope a Catholic or a Christian? The answer is no. The same way as these top-level guys like Netanyahu and the globalist members of the Council on Foreign Relations, these people aren't even, you can't qualify them as human. What they want to do doesn't even make sense. If you're rich and powerful, you're freaking out because you're wondering, how am I going to lose my Airstream jet and my private island and my factories and my fancy homes in 6 countries? Guess what? The whole world is going to become radioactive. You won't be able to go outside because the air will be radioactive, the water, the food. This is what these crazies are doing. And when this evil bastard Netanyahu does this, the only response that can happen is 150 to 200,000 missiles raining down in every square inch of Israel, and Israel unleashing in the temple of Dagon a massive force of nuclear weapons in every country within 8,000 miles of them, including, by the way, they can do intercontinental missiles to even hit America. And Israel can literally bring the world down. People don't know that. They don't understand this.
They have, by my estimation, probably close to 1,000 warheads of all different sizes, very advanced warheads, 4th and 5th generation. Why should a country the size of Wales, actually smaller than Wales probably, the size of Nova Scotia or Rhode Island, have 1,000 warheads?
It's smaller than Nova Scotia. You know how big Nova Scotia is? Nova Scotia, from the tip of Cape Breton to Yarmouth, is around 900 miles. And it varies between around 90 miles to about 200 and some miles wide. That's
I'm Lord and Baron of Nova Scotia.
Right, and
one
it's
of the
a lot
many
bigger.
old titles I got, but anyway,
I was born in Detroit, but raised there. I can tell you, Nova Scotia is about 4 times the size of Israel.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Israel is like a postage stamp. It's crazy, but it's a crazy postage stamp. And it's got,
Jesus said in the end times it would be a millweight.
It would be
a
millstone around the neck. It would be a fire pot among sheaves. It would be basically a cup of trembling. A cup of trembling means it's like Socrates with a cup of trembling. His final potion that will kill him, literally in his hand. So his hand is trembling because he knows once he drinks it, he's dead. That's what it means. The cup of trembling is now being served. I remember when I lost my mind. Welcome back back, and I'm looking at some of your information and blogs here. This is really good in terms of what the Syrian base. It's interesting if you look at the major news items and Drudge, etc. It's also the time when the United Nations and the international community has actually verified that the Syrians have neutralized their chemical weapons.
Yeah, I didn't get that far, but yes.
Yeah. But basically it means that
the day after, the same day that all the officials have confirmed that the chemical weapons production lines are destroyed, and the Syrians have just been turning handstands to comply with everything, Israel hits them. And this is so typical of the Israelis. They demand that what is good for everybody else is not good for them. They have their own standards, and they can get by with anything. They can do anything, but nobody can call them on it. And the reason for that, of course, is they tend to bribe or blackmail all the politicians. And they do that in the United Kingdom, they do that in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really, we are allowing them to box us in to our own destruction. It almost happened last month, and now you've got this crazy idiot, Netanyahu, out of the blue, has struck Syria. Well, there were some missiles he didn't like. Well, so what? There's probably 1,000 or 10,000 missiles in Syria that a bunch of the Arabs don't like.
Yeah,
so what?
I don't know, Tim. I don't know if this is a show play, because most people don't realize half of Syria is mountainous. This little attack on this one base, let's say they took out a chunk of missiles, Russian missiles, and they say they were worried about affecting the Israeli or the American or NATO Navy. The fact is, they can't stop the 150 to 200,000 missiles that are all the way from Hezbollah to Syria to all around the surrounding countries. The fact is, this does not reduce the risk for Israel.
He's putting the 6 million Jews at Israel at risk.
It's almost 7 million, which is a magic number they've been publishing for a century that they want to wipe out. So remember, you keep on hearing this number, 7 million, 7 million. The fact is, it was short probably by who knows what, in the Second World War, but the fact is, the people behind it were the Sabbatean so-called Jews and the Nazis, who were actually one and the same. People don't realize there's only been one Nazi. We had Barry Chamish on last week to talk about it. Only one Nazi has ever been prosecuted by Israel. Did you know that? Only one.
Yeah, the guy they kidnapped in Argentina. I can't think of his name.
He was never executed. He was just permanently put in prison. So people don't realize
they hung the guy. They hung the guy.
Yeah, but the fact is they only had one prosecution because, of course, it's a show play, because the real issue is there's collaboration between the Nazis.
Well, of course there was collaboration. Yes, and that's a historical fact.
And most people don't know the space program that we have is totally beholden to the Vatican. Totally. Because Operation Paperclip was a Vatican operation. It was an operation of two different, if you want to call it, groups within the Catholic Church that smuggled 100,000 German Nazis. Some of them were scientists and technicians. Most of them were not. High-level people. And the Luftwaffe never surrendered to the West. Most people don't realize the Luftwaffe, the worst division of all of the SS, never surrendered. People don't know this. They don't know these facts.
Well, Paperclip got a lot of their spies, and many of their spies farmed the bases, were early CIA operatives. The Russians, the Soviets did the same thing. It was a mad race to capture as many of their intelligence people and their scientists as possible. The Soviet space program was really started by the German scientists that the Soviets were able to capture, and our space program was largely started by the scientists that we were able to capture. Werner von Braun, he was the crown jewel of their space program. And I mean, he was a Nazi. He claims he wasn't, but I mean, he was their top boy, and he was behind. I mean, he had this concept of launching things into space and everything else back when rockets were.
He designed the rockets that were landing on Britain, but he didn't like it. He thought, isn't it a horrible thing, he said, that his rockets, which were designed to visit the moon, were used to actually bring payloads to terrorize the people of Britain. So,
well, that's the problem with aviation. I mean, I've been a senior consultant to several aviation firms, and that's the problem you always end up with, is the wrong people get the technology, and they use the technology to kill great numbers of people. And I don't have a problem with protecting America. I'm all in favor of that. But I do have a problem with turning everything we've got over to Israel so they can go and kill a few more Arabs and then blow up the whole world.
What Obama's done now is, over the last few years, he's actually handed over gratis, which no cost to the Israelis, fuel and air bombers to make sure they can go the distance, all the equipment and materials that they need in order to prosecute an air attack against Iran. And Iran has a Shaheed 3 missile.
They just sold several $1 billion worth of arms to the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia along with that, so that they can, with Israel, attack Iran in Syria. That's the get around. We didn't do the war last month, but then we'll let Israel and the Saudi Arabia and a few other of the Gulf Cooperative Council states do it down the road a little bit.
Yeah, they'll be very surprised by what's going to happen.
Why would you blow up the world? Why blow up the world? Unless I don't have an escape from this world other than hopefully going to heaven, hopefully not hell. But I mean, this is our planet. This is the beautiful blue planet that God gave us, and only a satanic force would want to rip it apart. And that's what it comes down to. This is Satan versus God. This is good, and on one hand, God, all that's holy and pure on one hand, and Satan, all that's evil, maggoty, despicable losers that would just want to destroy. They can't build. All they can do is destroy. This is what we're talking about.
Now, what it does now, when America does this, the Russians, on the other hand, are building now, because of America's response and behavior, 100 new bases. They're bringing the S-300 air defense system to the EU border of Belarus. You have this article up.
In large numbers.
In large numbers. So what's happening is the fault lines of World War III, the battle lines are being drawn, the equipment's being pulled into place. This is not good. We're not talking about whether it's 2 years, 5 years, or whatever. All the materials and equipment and people are actually lined up now for World War III, the end of human civilization, right as we speak.
God gave us a little bit of time last month. He gave us some more time, but Netanyahu is actively engaged in the workaround, the workaround began today with the twin attacks on Syria by Israel.
You did a good job of analyzing how Larry Summers admits the Fed is in a liquidity trap. And about a year ago, we had all our experts on, and I've done my research to realize that the derivatives market can't make money anymore. So the reason why they're marching to war is because the economic system is about to crash and burn. There's 5 nations, apparently, that are teetering on the edge of collapse. And I can't remember them all now, but it's like India and Brazil, etc. And all these nations, big nations, not little ones, they're teetering on internal collapse. And if they happen, the interest rates will rise, the derivatives market will explode, the interest rates will go up, we won't be able to service the debt. All by design. In other words, the detonator is set. It's like the Old West. I can hear that shh. And what's going on, you run like hell away from the dynamite besides the side of the mountain where you're doing drilling or mining. FUKUSHIMA, it's like, oh my gosh. Welcome back, and we're joined with Chris Harris, the Fukushima Zilla monster. Again, we can talk about Israel attacking, but I know it's one of those flying knives, and we don't know when the knife's going to finally cause a war, but what's happening in Fukushima is not theoretical, it's happening now. Right now, for example, we had a double typhoon last Saturday. We had an earthquake variously rated between 7.2 and 7.6. We know that the whole area is basically turning into a radioactive mush, so we're getting subsidence. They're in a big panic for some reason or other, and they probably know more than they're saying, whether the buildings are listing faster or they're subsiding quicker, or the Japanese, who have the only satellite system for picking up torsion fields around the Earth for the magnetic flux lines of the planet, because earthquakes and volcanoes you can predict from space. not just ground-based telluric current measurements, which they do at the universities here in California. From space, you can actually see it. So the Santiago, Chile earthquake that occurred a few years ago, the Japanese satellite could actually see the flux lines in the South Magnetic Pole go, see ya, for a couple of days before that major quake. So the Japanese know that this recent quake here around Fukushima Daiichi is a forequake or foreshock for probably a major upthrust off the Fukushima coast. That means we got a lot more really bad stuff coming. And at the very least, if this building 4 falls over, it's going to create a pyrophoric fire. In the words of Helen Caldicott, a pediatrician, nuclear expert who was on the coast-to-coast radio the other day, and her statement was, she lives in Australia right now, and her family, unfortunately, lives in Boston. If that blows, she's going to immediately get her family on a jet to the southern hemisphere. People don't understand how bad this is and how much worse it can get fairly quickly. The Japanese have also had known predictions, and I want you to quote this, that they've done, their experts in terms of when they expect the next upthrust to occur, and they predicted in 2010 that it'll reoccur in November of 2013. This month. That's starting tomorrow. This month's next. So tell us, Chris, what's going on? This is getting more Keystone Cop-ish, more otherworldly, more, oh my gosh, what's happening next? And I mentioned the other day about the chef that was actually take a trunk of mushrooms and other materials from Fukushima to a chef conference in Paris with all these certification slips saying it's all safe to eat. And he's got these eyes popping and this crazed look on his face like, you want to die with us? We're brothers, sisters. We die together. This is good. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And little girls being exposed and children being shuttered in their homes while they're getting fat because the parents won't move away. There are even people trying to donate property and lands to get the kids at least a few hundred miles away, upwind of these reactors. I think that this kind of mass suicide may be the first signs of radiation sickness. I just don't understand how these people can behave this way. When the Russians had Chernobyl, they brought in 600,000 plus military people with shovels and lead aprons and just shoveled the hell away, dropped helicopters, giant military helicopters full of concrete on until they created a concrete sarcophagus. Say, now we've done it. It's all buried. Let's go home. And the Russians, they calculated out literally that 4 million people will die prematurely from it. Already, 1.3 million people have died from Chernobyl, which is an itsy-bitsy fraction of the amount of radiation already released, and this sucker hasn't even got a head of steam on. This is going to be the most catastrophic environmental disaster in the history of planet Earth as long as humanity's been here, 75,000 or whatever years it is. Mankind is totally screwed. Totally.
We asked that question last week and maybe even before then. What was the urgency all of a sudden for moving spent fuel from Unit 4 or new fuel from Unit 4? It turns out we were correct when we they were probably going to go. They were probably going to remove the brand new fuel first.
And that's why they're removing it. That's why they're doing it, because we mentioned that they're in a panic because they think a big quake's coming. They know that the Ison comet, by the way, when it passes in November, is going to cause a coronal mass ejection, and most people don't realize that all earthquakes and volcanoes are plasma events. So if a CME when a coronal mass ejection occurs, the first thing that happens is you have light. You may get strobed with ultraviolet light for 4 to 8 hours. Strobed. Boom, boom, boom. Second thing is you get what's called a plasma storm, right? You get plasma that comes in right after you get neutrons. When that plasma hits the plasma of the Earth and the magnetosphere, it charges up the fault lines that can trigger off an earthquake or volcano.
Well, that's just what we need in Fukushima.
So that means if it's near the tipping point, if it's near the charge point to trigger off a major quake, all it needs is that final tap like in a carpenter's jig, and bam, you got a big quake. So expect when it crosses Mars on November 13th, not only this movie, which is called American Blackout, but we're very likely to see some mega quakes, some mega volcano releases, and some super bad weather happen because of this plasma storm, because we had last month an incredible record of M-class, almost X-class coronal mass ejections occur from these Kreutz diving comets that we've known for over 100 years. But the Ison is the biggest one, and it's going to dive the closest to the sun in human history. And this sucker is 6 kilometers across. When it happens, it's going to create a big superstorm on the sun. If it happens to be even marginally directed in our direction, we're going to have problems. Now,
like a Harrington event.
Right, even if it's a fraction of it. Like the one that hit Quebec was 1/3 of the Carrington event in 1989, and it took out the James B. Hydro project and blacked out the northeastern United States for days. So people need to start grasping that if you get a blackout, you're going to lose equipment, and they're doing it at the precise day that it's going to cross the orbit of Mercury, and it could induce a CME that day or thereafter that could crash our power grid and our satellites. And a CME will trigger off major superquakes, which could cause Fukushima Daiichi to become a real catastrophe. Right now it's catastrophic. I'm talking about a biblical level catastrophe where if you don't shutter inside your home, if you don't use HEPA filters, if you don't take radiation protection nutraceuticals like our NutriDefense, Nutritrel, etc., you're toast. Your DNA, your biotoxin levels are going to go orbital. You're going to start getting DNA damage and acute radiation sickness or chronic or cancer. You may have nosebleeds, you may have cognitive effects, you may have GI tract effects, and people don't grasp this. Even if you get over that, the immune system of the population is going to drop at the same time. The SARS-2 beta coronavirus is coming, and H7N9 is coming, and when you have a weakened population, this is the ideal grounds for a super airborne plague. We're there. It's going to be, in Latin, an annus horribilis, a horrible year. Next year is going to be a hellish year. And it could start early. We could have the nightmare before Christmas. And Obama and these globalists with their banker plan on starting a war in the Middle East or doing all these other things with Obamacare, this couldn't be worse timing. It couldn't be worse.
Well, or from their point of view, the best timing, because they want to kill us.
Right. Okay. Now, Chris, let's go through some more of the data on what you found on this. And you gave me this article here on radioactive fallout from Fukushima from this doctor, Stephen Hosea. Can you tell us all about it? Maybe you want to read it.
Well, he actually agrees with a lot of what you say about. He's a mainstream, in the mainstream rag. What is that one called? The Independent in Santa Barbara. I guess it must be a neighbor of yours out there. Basically, he says that the world as we know has changed, and I believe that humanity is staying on the brink of a possible worldwide nuclear holocaust. And the world as we know it has already changed the result of radioactive material released into the air and the ocean. And he says, I'm not an alarmist, but I'm alarmed. And he goes on and to discuss a lot of the material that we've already been discussing. So I guess it's you're in good company on that respect.
Let me read the first few sentences. I believe that humanity is standing on the brink of a possible worldwide nuclear holocaust. The world as we know it has already changed as a result of radioactive material that has been released into the air and the ocean. I am not an alarmist, but I am alarmed. I know that large amounts of radioactive material are in a precariously unstable situation in the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear facility. An inability to effectively keep this material cool could easily result in another nuclear event. And he goes on and on. I'll take this article and copy it, but people need to realize when we're putting this out there, for example, Michael Collins, who was reporting on the Rents program, got death threats and stopped broadcasting when he was putting out radiation advisories after this typhoon was about to strike a few days later, and an earthquake which struck Japan. And the Japanese know a big event is coming, and they're terrified. And repeating the basic measures I mentioned yesterday when we had on Dr. Ron Klatz, you need to take NutriDefense, Nutridyne, which is absolutely unique. It's not the same as Thyroid Shield or these other garbage nutraceuticals that are out there. You need to take our NutriDefense, Nutridyne, and Nutritrel, a long-acting alpha-lipoic acid. There's other ones in our thing, including N95 masks. People need to have HEPA filters for their home. They need to have hazmat. They need to be able to take off the rain gear and so on outside. People need to be ready for levels of radiation. Like, for example, here in Southern California, we're actually pretty lucky. Most of the jet stream is carrying it up north. But our radiation levels, when that tsunami, or that typhoon struck a few months ago, and they released a lot of radiation, it went up to 5 times background for, about 5 days. And it took a while to come back down again. It didn't come down instantly. what's happened is since the latest typhoon, the radiation's gradually climbed, and now it fluctuates between about 72 to 105 counts per minute. That's not good. I was trained, that's called hazmat. But we have much higher levels, higher altitudes, up in Idaho, Colorado, and elsewhere. And the government's response is when they set up RadNet, they actually removed the RadNet system in Idaho, in Boise, and didn't replace it because the counts were too high. Now, Michael Collins reported last week that the levels recently in Amarillo, Texas, and other places have gone orbital. So we're starting to see jet stream carry high radiation to the internal parts of the country, to the food belt, and to other parts that are carried across the poles to Europe and elsewhere. And by the way, don't get arrogant down there, including Dr. Caldecott, because I've studied this so thoroughly, I can tell you there's water currents that carry this directly through the equator. She made the statement that the mixing currents don't carry the air across the equator. I beg to differ. There's a stream of air that carries at 300 miles per hour in the upper atmosphere at 70,000 feet that carries 300 times the amount of water as the Amazon, and it does cross the equator. It's not the lower altitude, it's high altitude. It's super high speed, and it carries radiation directly to the southern hemisphere. There's water currents that carry directly to the western slope of Australia and to New Zealand, and also to the western coast of South America, from Ecuador all the way through to Argentina and Chile. So don't get southern hemispheric attitude of thinking it won't get you. The only thing different is the radiation levels will not peak until maybe a year and a half, 2 years later after they peak here. Right now, number one is Fukushima is dead and dying. I had a consult last week about a young girl who actually worked there 3 weeks in Tokyo City, a little town on the coast east of Tokyo, south of Fukushima, and another town basically south of Tokyo, and her hair was falling out. So she, in a big panic, called me to help to get her back. She came back from America, and they said, well, we still have work to do there. In other words, what? I said, are you kidding? Your company's going to still work there? The Americans last year set up an evacuation program along with the international community to evacuate all the citizens of Tokyo and Greater Tokyo area, which is the largest single industrial area on planet Earth. This is craziness. Not if, but
I don't think you can evacuate a city the size of Tokyo. I don't think it's possible. The magma chamber
for Mount Fuji is filling. The Japanese are geniuses at knowing that they have a satellite up there that can actually watch the torsion field flux lines of the planet, so they're setting up satellite-based earthquake prediction systems, which are very accurate, because when the South Pole disappears on the geomagnetic spectral patterns, you know you're going to get hit with a big quake like the one that hit Santiago, Chile. The South Pole literally disappeared from space. So what I see coming is the Japanese know that the science, Tier 1 science, by the way, which Professor McKenney talks about, Tier 1 science says there's going to be these comets are going to trigger off a coronal mass ejection that's going to trigger off major events in the Earth, earthquakes and volcanoes, that are going to make the current situation much worse and could create new Fukushimas like Indian Point off New York, the New Madrid fault system where there's 25 reactors sitting literally within strike distance. This is not good. And all of them have tons and tons of 50 to 60-year-old old fuel sitting there that's highly unstable, that it would be an ideal terrorist target, but the ultimate terrorist is our stupidity. Our stupidity and our inaction is the ultimate terrorist.
These fuel rod storage facilities are the two-ton elephant in the living room that nobody talks about, because people think of these facilities as a energy plant, a nuclear power plant, but they're also a nuclear rod, a used fuel rod storage facility, and that's the part that is the most dangerous. And Chris, we were talking on the break about, okay, they seem to be in a hurry now to move these rods, and just moving the safe rods, the ones that have no damage, is very, very dangerous. But then they have these rods that clearly have damage, and they could literally start out cause a horrific event. And my question to you was, if you have number 4 unit goes critical, the fuel rod storage facilities goes critical, can it spread to the other ones? And it can, right?
Well, yeah, and if you raise the neutron flux to extend out to Unit 3, let's say, there'll be an effect on there, and I don't know. I'm not sure what the state of their neutron absorber is in those pools, but can you imagine that? Can you imagine one pool going critical and then all of a sudden elements in another pool going critical also? That would be it's already devastating with just one. So I don't even want to think about two, but it's certainly the gamma rays.
Well, there's 7 pools there. I mean, what if it spread to 5 or 6 or 7?
Tim, that's a good question, and it needs to be addressed.
It's a Halloween question because it's a question right out of hell. It's so scary. It's just like, wow. One of my best friends is always calling me, and he's following this, and he says, this could be Armageddon. This is. I said, yeah, well, and I, quite frankly, other than prayer, I don't know what we're going to do about it. They've sat on their hands for 2.5 years now, and it was bad at the beginning, and it's gotten progressively worse. And now you've got three cores that are underground, but that's the least of the problem.
I agree with you. The question is why all of a sudden the urgency? What do they know? They had an earthquake there. But we know that even from North Anna's earthquake that happened here a year and a half ago, was that it took weeks to assess the damage of that. That plan was actually accessible.
So Tim, let's summarize. And Chris, the summary is, we talked about this before the show, Chris. What we have is a situation where they're scrambling, but we don't know what data. Do they have, inclinometers on the building to see if it's falling or tilting faster? Do they have things that measure the subsidence level? Do they have space-based or ground-based systems for predicting earthquakes to tell them that the earthquake that struck Fukushima is a foreshock of a much bigger quake coming? Are they terrified that any one of these parameters means that they're going to have a pyrophoric fire, and next Friday, the 8th, they're actually going to start pulling these fuel rod assemblies, which numerous scientists around the world, including Arne Gundersen and others, have stated that pulling these will increase the risk of a pyrophoric fire that they can't put out. So all of these they're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. And then why are they scrambling? Because they expect that whatever could happen that's not a pyrophoric fire by pulling these bent fuel rod assemblies out is worse than the danger of actually starting a fire by pulling them out. That's a
scary thought.
They're obviously feeling pressure that, like, they're one move away from checkmate. In other words, you and I, let's discuss, why can't we just shore up the building and let it stay there? Don't just do something, stand there.
What I would do is I'd say, here's the steps I'd take. Number one, shore up the buildings, including these cooling pools with a crazy design built 100 feet in the air. Number two, put the Starlight product into the ground and harden it up, and then create what's called a corium catcher underneath it with these containers that are lined with depleted uranium. So you catch the corium wherever it is, because they use ground penetrating radar remotely to know where it is, so you tunnel underneath it. Divert the water for the aquifer, so you actually have a full diversion project. Dry it out and create a crystalline sarcophagus with high concentrated hyperosmolar boronated water. You dehydrate out with microwave heater systems, which we use for oil exploration and oil well drilling. Make a concrete sarcophagus, and at later time when the technology is available, split the. Let me finish. You have to split the atoms down to non-radioactive isotopes, and if they have the technology or the future, this is a project that will take thousands of years, not hundreds or tens.
They never even took our recommendations to checkerboard the spent fuel, the spent fuels with spaces in between.
You mentioned that
elements.
Checkerboard means every second one like a checkerboard. Yeah, you found that out over the last few days, didn't you, Chris? That they didn't checkerboard them, so the fuel rod assemblies are one beside the other. Yeah, every single assembly is right beside the other.